It is now 12 o'clock and we can start the meeting. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from Geneva, the seat of the ATT Secretariat. My name is Dumisani Dladla, the head of the ATT Secretariat and the secretary for these meetings. We are on day 4 of our ATT meetings for this week. And today's discussions will be dedicated to the work of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting. They started yesterday and had discussions for about an hour, but they had to stop because after the end of an hour, and today they will continue with the discussions as indicated on the program of work. Before I pass over the floor to the working group co-chairs, I would want to remind delegates of the rules that are applicable in these meetings. Firstly, we have gone through these rules over and over again, but I'll keep on doing it. We request that all delegates switch off their cameras as well as their microphones during the proceedings, and particularly those who are connecting using their mobile phones. We have published the list of speakers this morning on the basis of requests that were made yesterday by 1800 hours Geneva time. We encourage delegates to check the speakers list so that they can see whether they appear on the speakers list or not, so that they don't have to request the floor via the chat function if they are already on the speakers list. Because if they don't observe the speakers list, normally we have had some instances yesterday when we had delegates requesting for the floor 2 times via the chat function as well as via the list of speakers. Arrangements for the calling up or for the invitation of speakers to take the floor will continue as it was since the beginning of the week. We'll call them in a set of 3 so that they will be ready to speak at the time when they are called upon to speak. When you are invited to take the platform, we request that you unmute yourself so that we can be heard. And of course, when there are problems about connectivity or sound, we will therefore proceed to the next speaker on the list and come back to you when the issues related to your connectivity or sound have been addressed. And finally, interpretation is available for these meetings. And if you go to your screen at the bottom, there's a button that deals with the languages that are available. If you click on that, you are able to access the language that you would prefer to use for the duration of the meetings. Having addressed then or reminded delegates of the rules applicable to these meetings, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce the co-chairs of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting. And they are, the first one is Mr. Alejandro Alba from Mexico, as well as Ms. Yulia Vladescu from Romania. They will be facilitating their session remotely. They are not with me here, but they will be facilitating their sessions remotely. Without much ado, I would therefore cross over to them, and I'm told that they can hear me and they can see me. And I would wish then to cross over to the co-chairs of the working group to proceed with their work. Over to you, co-chairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Head of the Secretariat. Good afternoon, good morning, dear colleagues, depending where you are located. I hope you can hear me well. Well, welcome to the second day of the meeting of the working group of transparency and reporting. We have an extensive agenda ahead of us, and we hope to make the best use of the time to address all the outstanding agenda items. We will begin with the discussion on the possible update of the reporting templates, which is the last topic under agenda item 2, challenges concerning reporting. After that, we will address the agenda items on substantive reporting and transparency issues, the organizational means for information exchange, the IT platform, reporting and transparency functionalities, and the mandate of the working group for a period between CSP7 and CSP8. Without further ado, we begin the discussion on the reporting templates. As you know, in our introductory document, we provided as annexes A and B 2 explanatory notes on the rationale of the proposed adjustments to the initial and annual reporting templates. In this meeting, the co-chairs will give an overview of the most relevant explanations of these proposed changes. After that, we will open the floor for your interventions. We look forward to hearing from you about your understanding of these proposed changes. In this regard, we seek to confirm in this session that there is a common understanding of the proposed changes. If possible, we also want to hear if, with understanding of those changes, you would be in a position to accept the proposed changes. We actually think that at this point, and after prolonged discussions on this topic, there would be no need for additional changes. Instead, it would be important to work with what has already been proposed. Your feedback in this regard will be relevant for us to be able to make an assessment of this topic and propose a course of action in the period ahead of the CSP7. I will start with the most relevant explanations about the proposed changes to the annual report template, which is included in Annex B of the introductory document of the co-chairs. As you can see in the document that we prepared together with the Secretariat, the text of the annual report template is presented in the first column together with the drafts, adjustments proposed in track changes. An explanation for each of these changes is provided in a second column, in parallel where the proposed changes appear. On the cover page, the most relevant draft amendments are the following. The word voluntary in paragraph 6 of the cover page and also in other parts of the template has been deleted because the designation of information to be provided as mandatory or voluntary raises a broader issue of what is mandatory and voluntary information under the treaty and thus affects national interpretation. This debate will go beyond the working group mandate. Designating certain information as voluntary or mandatory has been considered confusing because the treaty doesn't prescribe exactly which information needs to be provided. This is also clearly indicated in questions 1 and 2 of the fact-type guidance documents on the annual reporting obligation. This document in question 22 clarifies what represents a common understanding, not a treaty obligation, of what information states parties should include as a minimum when they report their authorized or actual exports and imports. In that regard, this is just a question of aligning the language of the annual reporting template and the fact-type guidance document. For clarity, there is also a difference between the voluntary and mandatory nature of information on the one hand, and the voluntary or mandatory nature of treaty provisions on the other hand. This adjustment only refers to the voluntary or mandatory nature of information to be reported. In that respect, this doesn't fall within the remit of the working group's work. There is also the amendment to paragraph 7 to align it to the revised wording in the body of the report and to make it clearer that the reporting state party must indicate whether the report should be made publicly available. The current wording is confusing and has led to some state parties indicating that they only want distribution to other states parties against their actual intention. There is also the addition of paragraph 8 to alert reporters about the existence and availability of the fact-type guidance document, reflecting the observation that consideration should be given to whether the work of the working groups should be reflected in the templates captured in paragraph 6 of the co-chairs of the working group inventory of comments and suggestions made by the working group participants regarding the reporting templates in the working group co-chairs reports to CSP7. There are also simple corrections to some terms, such as the correction of the word registry for register, or the inclusion of tick boxes for the reporter to indicate whether it's he or she and his or her job title to facilitate communication. The date of submission has been replaced with date of report because often the date indicated in the date of submission field is not the actual date that the state party submitted the reports to the ATT Secretariat. In practice, it generally reflects the date that the report was finalized by the state party or the date it was signed off by the responsible government entity. But sometimes there is a delay between the date of finalization or sign off and the actual date of submission to the ATT Secretariat. Accordingly, this date can be misleading if taken as an indication of the date of submission. The ATT Secretariat records the actual date of submission in a database as the date that the ATT Secretariat received the annual report via email, post, or through the online reporting tool. Often the date of the actual submission recorded by the ATT Secretariat doesn't match the date of submission indicated in the annual report. A section on UNODA, UNROCA has been added to give the reporting state the opportunity to consent to UNODA using the relevant information in the state submission of its ATT annual report as a basis for its report to the UNROCA. The proposal was introduced in 2019 in line with the long-standing call for synergies between the reporting regimes. The proposal to create this synergy between the reporting regimes will benefit UNROCA and in that regard allow for a more comprehensive overview on the global arms trade, not only involving ATT states parties, but potentially all UN member states. On both annual report on exports and annual report on imports availability, two changes have been introduced. One, the phrase is available only to states parties has been replaced with may be made publicly available. This because the phrase is available only to states parties has been misinterpreted by some states parties and has caused some confusion. The intention is to make it clear that if a states party ticks yes to these statements, the report will be made available to everyone. And if they tick no, the report will only be available to states parties. Two, the single tick box with the no indication of yes or no has been replaced with two tick boxes, one marked yes and one marked no. The use of a yes box and a no box should make it easier for states to indicate whether they agree with the statement or not. In the explanatory notes, several additions were made to alert reporters to the existence and availability of the fact-type guidance document and direct them to the relevant section of the guidance document. Here, we would like to recall that amendments to the fact-type guidance document, which would require consensus, could potentially require also amending the reporting template, but in practice, so far, has shown that this is unlikely. In any case, amendments to the fact type guidance document would most require changing or adding a question number in the annual reporting template. If the CSP would like to endorse an amendment that requires changing or adding a question number in the reporting template, the CSP could simply ask the Secretariat to do so. In annexes 1, 2, 3A, and 3B of the template, registry was replaced by register. The reference to voluntary was eliminated in the same terms as the previous explanation. And it was pointed out that nil reports on exports and imports may be made publicly available, including the yes or no tick boxes in the terms of the previous explanation. Well, for my part, this would be the most important relevant explanation on the proposed amendments to the annual reporting template. And now I would like to hand the floor to my co-chair for the initial reporting template.
Thank you, Alejandro, for this presentation. And also from my side, greetings to all delegates, and thank you for being with us today. I will continue with the most relevant explanations about the proposed changes to the initial reporting template, which is included as Annex A of the introductory document of the co-chairs. This document was drafted similarly with the document presented previously by my co-chair, in the sense that it contains a table that includes in the first column the text of the adjusted initial reporting template with the drafts proposed adjustments appearing in track changes. And in the second column, an explanation for each of these changes in parallel where the proposed changes appear. I will try to explain the most relevant adjustments, and if some of them repeat under more sections, I will only explain them once and won't insist on them when they appear again. On the cover page, the following adjustments have been made. Instructions have been introduced on how to indicate the changes made by a state party to its initial report in case of submitting an update to the report. This change is proposed because some states parties that have submitted revised or updated initial reports have not indicated what information is new, thus making it difficult to identify new measures that have been implemented. The date of submission has been replaced with date of report, similarly as in the case of the annual report, for the reasons explained earlier by my co-chair. Often the date indicated in the date of submission field is not the actual date the state party submitted the report to the ATT Secretariat. Likewise, the phrase "is available only to states parties" has been replaced with "may be made publicly available," because the phrase "is available only to states parties" has been misinterpreted by some states parties and has caused some confusion. Besides, the single tick box with no indication of yes or no has been replaced with two tick boxes, one marked yes and one marked no, to make it easier for states to indicate whether they agree with the statement or not. Under section 1 on the national control system and list, the most relevant adjustments are the following. Numbered headings have been inserted to give information on what certain subsections relate to, and to help users navigate around the report. Rearrangement of the elements included in Article 5 has been made for them to follow the exact order as they appear in the said article of the treaty. Unnecessary wording has been eliminated in an attempt to take away ambiguous language, and additional words have been inserted for more clarity. For instance, the words arms or items have been introduced next to the phrase "the following," to make it clearer to understand what a specific question is referring to. Or another example, the phrase what the additional categories are in section 1H has been added to make it clearer what information that section is asking for. The fields requesting additional information about the national control system and the national control list have been changed because the original text only requested additional background information if the reporting state answered no to any element, but now states parties are encouraged but not required, just encouraged to give additional information if they respond yes to any element. This is designed to encourage states parties to give more detail of their national control systems to help build a compendium of common practice among states parties in this area. 2 additional questions have been added in an effort to obtain more information on whether states parties regulate different types of transfers and whether they have more than one control list, as some states parties that have submitted an initial report indicated that they have more than one control list. The question as to whether a state party has provided its national control list to the ATT Secretariat has been deleted because it is a question of fact that can be objectively realized, given that the Secretariat has records of which states have submitted their national control lists and which have not. And also because some states parties have answered this question incorrectly in their initial reports, for instance, indicated they have submitted their national control list when in fact there is no record of them having done so. The same happened with the question as to whether a state party has notified the ATT Secretariat of its national point of contact. For the reasons I previously mentioned. However, appropriate fields have been inserted in order to give the user the opportunity to provide details of the state party's national point of contact in its initial report. The question regarding the definitions of items in the national control list was rephrased. The original wording was phrased in such a way that it assumed the reporting state party had definitions of the items in its national control list without directly asking whether definitions existed. Besides, the phrase, please provide more information below has been replaced with a list of options the user can choose from in an effort to encourage the user to provide more information by making it easier to answer the question and to make the information provided by states parties under that section more comparable. Under section 2, prohibitions, adjustments have been made to the first question to avoid the user having to refer back to articles of the treaty in order to answer the question and make it easier to respond accurately. Besides, states parties have been given the opportunity to provide additional information. The question on the international agreements that the state is a party to, which are relevant for the application of Article 2 of the treaty, which was initially phrased as a statement, has been rephrased as a question and to be consistent with phrasing throughout the reporting template, which addresses the user in the second and not the third person. The latter has also been the reason for rephrasing the question on the international agreements relevant for defining war crimes, which now asks the user which international agreements he considers relevant. And besides, states parties have been given the option to consult a non-exhaustive, non-binding list of examples of the international agreements that other states parties have reported relevant to this article in their initial reports. This list will be made available online. It has not been annexed to the reporting template because it may be subject to amendment and expansion as new initial reports are submitted by states parties listing new or different international agreements. Under section 3, which relates to exports, a new question has been included to determine whether or not the reporting state party has a definition of export in its national legislation. Details of whether and how states define the types of transfer identified in Article 2, Paragraph 2, so export, import, transit, transshipment, and brokering in their national legislation, will help build a compendium of common practice among states parties in this area. Similar questions have been introduced under each section related to the transfers identified in Article 2, Paragraph 2. In the interest of saving time, I will briefly recall them when I will get to the respective sections. Question 3F on mitigating measures has been amended in order to encourage states parties to give examples of situations when they consider undertaking measures to mitigate risks in order to identify national practices in this regard. A new section, section 3J, has been included to determine whether or not the reporting state party has guidelines on how to apply its export assessment requirements to an export. Such guidelines could again help other states parties in developing the national systems and conducting export assessments, and will help build a compendium of common practice among states parties in this area. The sub-question, are there also legal provisions for suspension or withdrawal of a license, has been placed as a separate question, 3N, because this is an important consideration in determining whether a state party can fulfill the obligation under Article 7, Paragraph 7, to reassess an authorization that has been granted if it becomes aware of new relevant information. Under Section 4, imports, there were some editorial adjustments to make the text more comprehensible and to more closely reflect the wording used in the treaty. Besides, a new question has been included to determine if the reporting state party has the definition of the term import. Under Section 5 on transit and transshipment, similar adjustments as in Section 4 have been made. And the same applies to Section 6, brokering. And here, in addition, given that Article 10 of the treaty includes a reference to requiring brokers to register or obtain written authorization before engaging in brokering as measures that states parties may take to regulate brokering, the inclusion of a reference to these specific regulatory measures has been made in order to respond to the observation that questions on measures concerning brokering were omitted from the initial reporting template, made in the inventory of comments and suggestions made by the working group participants regarding the reporting templates. Under Section 7 on diversion, there have not been any noteworthy changes. Under Section 8 on record keeping, request for the reporting state to include details of how long records are kept has been included to assist in the collection of information on national practice in this area. and also having in mind the potential use of knowing practices about the practical implications or inconveniences of keeping records for more than 10 years. Under section 12, international assistance, some important adjustments were made. Notably, a new subsection B has been added to give a state party that is in a position to provide assistance in accordance with Article 16 of the treaty, an opportunity to specify the type of assistance the state is in a position to provide. This addition also responds to the observation that questions relating to international assistance were omitted from the initial reporting template, included in the inventory of comments and suggestions made by the working group participants regarding the reporting templates. Likewise, a new subsection C has been added to give a state party that would like to request assistance in accordance with Article 16 an opportunity to specify the type of assistance the state wishes to request or to receive. That was my my last comment on the explanations for the adjustments that have been made to the initial reporting template. I hope you could follow me, but please note that I am happy to respond to any of your questions either now or after this meeting in writing. Now we would like to invite participants to share their views. As we have understood from yesterday's discussion, some states may still assess the proposed changes to the templates. We invite all participants who have specific comments to send them in writing to the ATT Secretariat. What we would actually like to hear now is whether, as a matter of principle, states parties would be in a position to support the proposed changes, with the understanding, of course, that further refinements could be made in the run-up to CSP7 on the proposals we have now on the table. The co-chairs took note of the remarks on the topic which were expressed during yesterday's session by some delegations. After also hearing the views expressed today, the co-chairs will take a very good consideration of all the comments and remarks transmitted and will provide a proposal on how to follow up with this task in the period ahead to the CSP7. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the delegations that have registered to speak under this agenda item. Other delegations wishing to share their views are invited to signal this intention via the chat function. The first three delegations on the speakers list are Japan, Mexico, and WILP. So Japan, please, if you are ready to speak, you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, okay. We can. Please go ahead.
Japan would like to thank the co-chairs of the Transparency and Reporting Working Groups from Mexico and Romania for their dedication to the work of these groups, despite the unprecedented circumstances of the pandemic. Concerning the reporting templates, Japan would like to thank the co-chairs and Secretariat for their efforts in clarifying the proposed amendments by adding explanatory note to the draft reporting templates. While we have seen that some of the previous comments which were submitted last year are reflected on the updated draft, Japan would like to add a couple of additional technical comments on the draft, so we will provide them to the co-chairs in writing later. And Japan understands the importance of adjusting templates to avoid ambiguous language and make them more user-friendly. However, we should also be mindful that frequent updates would make chronological data comparison difficult, as well as the risk of creating additional burdens on the reporting tasks, such as data gathering and filling in blanks, which might pose an impediment to fulfilling reporting obligations on time. In addition, as the work of revising and adjusting page after pages of the templates requires time-consuming effort from all of us, So Japan expects that once we can agree on introducing a new format, the revised version should be used on a long-term basis. Furthermore, Japan attaches the great importance to transparency in the conventional arms trade through the reporting. In these connections, Japan welcomes the decisions by the EU on 16th of April to provide financial support to the capacity building project for the ATT National Point of Contact, which includes support for reporting capacity. We believe that ensuring transparency in the arms trade is important to build confidence among state parties and the international community. And it is also contributes to international and regional peace, security, and stability as outlined in Article 1 of the treaty. Finally, Japan would like to call on all state parties to submit their reports in a timely manner. I thank you, co-chairs.
Thank you to the delegation of Japan, and we look forward to receiving your specific comments in writing. I would like now to call on the delegation of Mexico.
Mr. Co-Chair, just to confirm that you can hear me well.
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I will switch to Spanish then.
My delegation would like to thank the work done by the co-chairs and the Secretariat for developing the documents that incorporates the changes to the reporting templates and the document with explanatory notes on changes proposed. We consider that this document, the latter, gives us clarity and facilitates the understanding of the changes proposed for the templates. We subscribe the proposal for changes in the templates because it solves the gaps and the elements that are needed in the template. So we call on delegations to support the effort of the co-chairs, which is aimed at facilitating a better submission of initial and annual reports. Thank you, co-chair.
Thank you, Mexico. Thank you for the support expressed to the co-chair's efforts. And now I would like to give the floor to WILP, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Please.
Okay,
proceed.
great. Thank you. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom appreciates the work undertaken by the co-chairs of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting to progress the standing agenda items and the recurring and specific tasks, and to identify methods for doing so that account for the reduced meeting time and changed meeting formats caused by the pandemic. Promoting transparency is a key purpose of the Arms Trade Treaty, as stated in its Article 1. Poor reporting rates, inconsistencies in the type and level of data provided in the reports, and a trend toward more private reporting are among the main transparency challenges that have emerged in recent years. Under this agenda item, we wish to offer some responses to the proposed changes to the reporting templates. These are in line with what we submitted in writing as part of the CSP6 meeting cycle. We noted then, and do so now, that several of the proposed changes to the reporting templates, as well as plans for future work, can help to address the challenges described above and move the ATT community in a positive direction. In particular, WILP welcomes the modification to both the initial and annual voluntary reporting templates regarding the opportunity to make reports public. While this option de facto existed in the earlier formulation, the new formulation improves the likelihood of that occurring by implying public reporting as the default. Second, the proposed modification to the initial voluntary reporting template in Section 2 on prohibitions that sets out each of the paragraphs included in Article 6. This lends specificity to the report and ensures that those completing a report are fully aware of the language of the treaty. The reference to the list maintained by the ATT Secretariat is a helpful way of providing support and guidance to those completing reports. Thirdly, the modification to the initial voluntary reporting template in Section 3E that asks if national risk assessment procedures include all the criteria described in Article 7.1a and b and Article 7.4, and invites states parties to provide further information if it responds yes. As the experience of the CSP7 ATT meeting cycle demonstrated, little is known about state risk assessment procedures for gender-based violence, and more information sharing in this area is crucial to improve implementation of Article 7.4. Doing so also supports the decision taken in paragraph 22C3 of the final report of the 5th Conference of States Parties. The new questions in sections 2 and 3, asking if a state party has specific guidelines as relevant to their practice in those areas, and that invite the provision of further information and details, likewise help to create a more comprehensive picture of state practice. The encouragement to states parties to provide updates to their initial report through Annex A would address concerns expressed that a clear and consistent process to update initial reports has not been developed, nor was any other guidance on how to do so. And finally, the removal of the word voluntary throughout the annual report template is significant. Its previous inclusion undermined the mandatory nature of the reports writ large and disincentivized reporting beyond the bare minimum necessary. Thank you.
I thank you for this feedback, as well as for the comments provided previously in writing during the drafting process. Now, the next 3 delegations on my speakers list are Control Arms, Ireland, and Argentina. Please, Control Arms.
Buenos días, ¿me escuchan bien?
Good
Yes.
morning, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'll deliver my statement in Spanish. Muchas gracias, copresidentes.
Thank you, co-presidents. The ATT monitor would like to start congratulating the co-chairs of the working group and the secretariat for giving resources and guidelines about the presentation, about the reporting during this period. We support and congratulate all the work done collectively to respect and comply with reporting obligations so that all state parties can do it in a comprehensive, precise, and timely way. These initiatives, besides these initiatives, there are resources from civil societies that are aimed at strengthening the implementation of obligations and the reporting obligations and improve transparency in the arms trade. Specifically, the stakeholders of the treaty can consult annual reports in ATT Monitor to obtain information about obligations, about the presentation of reports and examples of challenges and good practices. Our monitor can also be a resource for co-chairs of this sub-working group as they continue their work to assisting state parties that are facing challenges in reporting. The findings of our monitor are regularly submitted to the conference, the state parties conference. And for the first time in these years, they were presented in an event in Spanish, which analyzed and examined specifically the status of treaty implementation. Our monitor revises the efficacy and clarity of the template, of the reporting templates of initial and annual reports, and the efforts done by the co-chairs of this working group and the secretariat to gather comments on template modifications and submit suggestions with clarity and concisely. The adoption of these amendments, it's a very important step to face challenges on the reporting, and they're also necessary to support the objectives of transparency and to promote confidence, which is one of the aims of the treaty. The amendments proposed will help state parties in their reporting. But we recognize that they're limited to changes on inconsistencies. And of course, they can bring light to the information. To face in an integral, excuse me, says the speaker.
Can I continue?
Can I continue? Can I continue? To face the challenges in the reporting, we need to work much more. For example, in spite of the objective and end of the treaty to improve transparency on arms trade, the sample of the report shows data aggregation. And this is a hurdle to understanding the notified transparencies. This is very frequent in small arms and light weapons. And in the actual sample, the state parties can aggregate different exporting countries and importing countries under the same category. So this is not transparent. The recommendation of the Stimson Center that the annual template disaggregates all arms, including SALWs, would solve the problem of excessive aggregation of information, although this is actually included in the list of amendments of the report samples. Monitor of the TCA, of the ATT, welcomes the amendments proposed if they can help state parties to report in a simpler and more comprehensive way. This includes the elimination of information as voluntary in both samples, amendments about the public disponibility of reports in the verification areas. These changes proposed are going to contribute positively to the efforts of the state parties to inform about the adopted measures for the ATT implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Control Arms, for your comments, and many thanks to the ATT Monitor for the great support to the work of this working group that has been provided so far. Next on the speakers list is Ireland. May I call on the delegation on Ireland?
Thank you very much for the floor, co-chairs. I'd like to align Ireland with a statement made by the EU yesterday and offer the following remarks in a national capacity. Ireland believes that the obligation on states parties to submit timely and comprehensive reports is an essential component of the treaty's effective implementation. Ireland thanks Ms. Parker of the Secretariat for her presentation on the status of reporting yesterday. We remain concerned that overall compliance with reporting obligations remains disappointingly low. We recognize that many states parties continue to experience difficulties meeting their ATT reporting requirements, including due to a lack of capacity and resources, internal coordination challenges, and difficulties in conducting technical assessments. We understand these issues and must work collectively to find ways to overcome these numerous challenges. We are hopeful that the proposed changes to the reporting template will facilitate timely responses. Ireland places a high value on information sharing and exchange within the ATT. The initial report and annual report are critical assets in achieving this. We take note of the adjustments proposed and are pleased to see they bring greater clarity to the documents and look forward to supporting them. In particular, we anticipate that the changes proposed as per explanation 3 in the initial report and explanation 10 of the annual report will reverse the trend of increasing numbers of reports not being made publicly available. To avoid taking the floor again under agenda item 5, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat for their tireless support in maintaining the IT infrastructure of the treaty, which has become even more important as we've been forced to move online for much of our work. We would like to propose that the option to appoint a second point of contact be included in these systems. This would act as a redundancy measure if access issues emerge, and further facilitate easier access for states, particularly those whose engagement on the ATT is divided between Geneva and Capital. Thank you very much.
I thank you for your support and also for this proposal that we noted, and we will see how to explore it further. The last delegation on the speakers list is Argentina. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, co-chairs, and I'll deliver the statement in Spanish. En primer lugar, agradecemos.
First of all, we would like to thank the co-chairs for developing this document, and we take note of the amendments proposed. We would like to concentrate on 3 issues. First of all, for us, it is essential to keep available and updated the list of national contact points in order to facilitate the exchange of information and the engagement between states. Second element, we highlight the importance of information exchanges in addition to those that take place in the framework of the ATT. In our case, in Argentina, we highlight the exchanges in the framework of the Working Group on Firearms and Ammunitions of Mercosur and partner states, in which Argentina participates actively. We have also signed an agreement that is now in the process of being ratified. Another outcome of the common work of this group is the adoption in our 36th meeting, which was held in November 2020, of a regional correspondence code, which is aimed at finding a common language of exchange to identify the controlled goods or equipments, to avoid confusion, because these different goods or equipments may have different names in different countries. We hope that this code could become a tool to improve the traceability of firearms and to strengthen the common regulatory framework. In specific cases of diversion, it is important to remember the right of the states to not make their information public, including conclusions and general lessons learned arising from these discussions. Thank you, Mrs. or Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Argentina, for these comments. We have taken note of your comments with regard to keeping available and updated the list of national points of contact and the importance of information exchanges. Now we would like to ask other participants if they wish to take the floor to signal this via the chat function. May I ask the Secretariat if there are other requests on the chat room?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We've received at this point one request for the floor, and that comes from South Africa. Thank you.
Okay, then I invite South Africa to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. My delegation extends our gratitude to the co-chairs of this working group for their hard work. Reporting is a mandatory aspect of the treaty and has great relevance to the functioning of the ATT regime. In this regard, the initiatives of the Transparency and Reporting Working Group to assist state parties are recommended and lauded. We encourage the co-chairs to continue to work towards improving the reporting capacity of state parties. We should be careful not to impose additional burdens on state parties regarding their reporting obligations. It must be noted that the mandate provided by CSP5 was taking into account the inventory of comments and suggestions regarding the reporting templates and the online reporting tool with respect for Article 13 of the treaty, considering adjustments to the reporting templates deemed necessary to address uncertainties and inconsistencies to ensure compatibility between the online reporting tool and the proposed public searchable database that allows for queries and extracting data. This mandate was as a result of few delegations declining to open the discussion on the templates, but the mandate was rather to concentrate on user-friendliness of the online reporting tool and not to address the quality of reporting or to ensure compatibility with the online reporting tool and the proposed public searchable database. In the interest of time, I will not repeat the comments submitted by South Africa during the consultations in the lead up to CSP6. Safe to say that South Africa will once again study the proposals and will submit additional comments, in addition to the comments already submitted, some which remains valid. I thank you.
I also thank the delegation of South Africa, and we look forward to receiving your comments. Many thanks to all the delegations that have contributed to this discussion. I assume that there are no other requests for the floor. Could you please confirm, Mr. Head of the Secretariat?
Madam Co-Chair, we have another request for the floor, and it comes from Canada's National Firearms Association. I repeat, Canada's National Firearms Association. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to give them the floor then.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for hosting the meeting today. I'm Charles Zach. I'm calling from Canada with Canada's National Firearms Association. So I understand that we are not really specifically talking about the quality of the templates, but this has come up before about the actual definitions of some of the categories in here, namely the category of assault rifles that is in the category. And I understand that that category is it's vague because I guess the parties have not been able to agree on a universal definition. I put it to the committee that that may in itself be hindering proper reporting and maybe dissuading people from actually submitting their report because it's such a vague category. And it's a big category as well too. The biggest concern that we have with our organization is that this lack of definition is used politically by states to include firearms that aren't really assault rifles into the national control list, and it misrepresents the that particular category for that nation. So I guess my question is, how do we resolve this now? I find this to be a big flaw in the reporting, and it causes a lot of confusion. So if we're trying to make this more clear for everybody to do, I think this needs to be redressed. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments and for the question. I am afraid I don't have an answer right now on the spot, but we will make sure to reflect on this and to provide an answer in the summary report of the meeting. Are there other requests for the floor?
Madam Co-Chair, we don't have any other requests for the floor. Thank you.
Thank you then. Again, many thanks to all the delegations that have contributed to this discussion. As explained, the co-chairs will take a very good consideration of all the comments and remarks expressed, and we'll provide a proposal on how to follow up with this task in the period ahead to the CSP7. The co-chairs would like to finalize the discussion that has been going on for quite some time now, as soon as possible, of course. The uncertainties and inconsistencies in the reporting templates affect the quality of reporting and need to be addressed. It is important that the adjustments we make take away ambiguous language and enhance the user friendliness of the templates. Besides adjustments to ensure compatibility with the online reporting tool and the proposed public searchable database are not optional if we want to ensure that the templates strictly correspond to the online reporting tool, and if we want to move forward with the development of the public searchable database. So again, we will reflect on all the comments and provide a proposal on how to follow up with this task further. I will close the agenda item, this agenda item now, and move ahead with the next one, as we have an extensive agenda ahead of us. So having exhausted all the topics under agenda item 2 related to challenges concerning reporting, it is now time to move to agenda item 3 that relates to substantive reporting and transparency issues. In the interest of time and to avoid situations when participants would have to take the floor too many times in this virtual setting, we will open the floor for participants' comments after the presentation of the two topics. The co-chairs have also invited some designated speakers to make interventions under this agenda item. We shall start with the first task, which is a discussion on the public availability of annual and initial reports. As we were informed by the Secretariat's presentation yesterday, the number of states parties that choose to make their reports available to states parties only has increased year by year. Besides, some states that have submitted public ATT annual reports in the past gradually shifted to limiting their availability to states parties only. As you may recall, during previous meetings of the working group, including during yesterday's session, several states parties and stakeholders have expressed concern about this trend, which the co-chairs consider legitimate in light of the treaty's purpose in Article 1 of promoting transparency. As the rationale for private reporting remains unclear and the subject has not been debated before in the working group, discussion on this topic would help the ATT community achieve a more comprehensive understanding of the reasons why states parties choose this option. Therefore, the co-chairs decided to retain the discussion on the agenda of this virtual meeting. We would like to recall that the topic is not included in the agenda to discuss whether or not making the reports publicly available is a treaty obligation. The reporting templates and the frequently asked questions style guidance document on the annual reporting obligations clearly state that this is a decision for each state party to make. The only intention of this discussion is to allow ATT stakeholders to understand the challenges, limitations, or preferences of states parties that choose not to make their reports public without questioning their right to do so. We would just like to note that one reason may be that this section in the reporting template is confusing, and an effort to remedy that confusion is under discussion, as we have seen earlier today during the debate on the update of the reporting templates. About that, the co-chairs would like to reiterate that they encourage states parties after submitting the report to access the reporting section on the ATT website to check if their reports were published in accordance with their preference, and to signal any discrepancies or changes in preference, perhaps, to the ATT Secretariat. For this discussion, the co-chairs have tried to secure some interventions of the states parties that had chosen to make some of their reports available to states parties only, and invited a few of them to address the meeting. Two of the states approached have kindly accepted the invitation and agreed to briefly make some remarks on their decision. The co-chairs very much appreciate their willingness and openness to share with the group the rationale behind their decisions, and we would like to strongly encourage others to follow their example. These two delegations are Greece and Mauritius, but I don't know, Mauritius has signaled some difficulties in accessing the meeting, and I don't know if they were able to join us. I don't know if they can hear us now. Therefore, I would like to give the floor first to Greece and then see if we can also hear from Mauritius. If not, we will move to the next topic. So Greece, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Julia. And I would like to thank the co-chairs for this opportunity to intervene under this agenda topic. When we joined the ATT, our decision to maintain reporting among member states of the treaty was founded on the following premise. Reporting of exports of military and defense-related material is undertaken in multiple forums, as everybody here is well aware. From a national capacity and perspective, we report to at least 4 separate entities. That is, we report to the EU, to the UN, Registry of Conventional Arms, to the ATT, obviously, and to the OSCE. The EU and ATT reports are obligatory and legally binding. The ATT includes, but is not limited to, the scope of the UN Registry of Conventional Arms. The UN Registry is a voluntary reporting instrument for transparency purposes, while the ATT is a legally binding treaty with an interactive mechanism aimed at inter alia streamlining export control guidelines among member states, and, as Article 1 notes, to establish the highest possible common international standards for international trade in conventional arms. Furthermore, ATT capacity building is based on bilateral information exchange or with the support of and collaboration of the Secretariat, in an effort to establish common procedures for transfers of military goods among member states that share or strive to implement common international principles of export control of military goods. The option of confidential reporting among ATT member states is one of the components for capacity building within the ATT membership. Capacity building strengthens, from our perspective at least, the prospect of universalization of the treaty. Furthermore, I'd like to note here that not all NATO member states, as Greece is a NATO member state, are members of the ATT at this point, while all EU member states are part of the treaty. From a national perspective, the information submitted to the ATT relates only to the military transactions, i.e. state transactions, exports and imports for the armed forces within a given calendar year. Information regarding the issuance of export licenses for commercial military goods are collated and reported in the annual national report based on the obligations of the European Union and the Common Position, Article 8, as well as the report submitted to the OSCE on transfer of military goods. From a national perspective, there is always the unlikely possibility that
I'm sorry, I think I lost you, but I don't know if it's if I have a problem with the connection or perhaps Dries has one.
His presentation has stopped.
Okay.
Madam Co-Chair, it would appear that we have lost connection with Chris. So we don't have connection with Chris at the present moment. That's the reason why we can't hear them.
Okay, thank you for explaining me that. I understand that there is also a problem with Mauritius connection. So perhaps we can move to introducing the next topic, and then if the case, we will get back to their intervention after the presentation of the second topic. Alejandro, could you please take over from here?
Gracias, Julia. Me voy a permitir hablar en español.
Thank you, Julia. I will be speaking in Spanish. The second block is aggregation of data for annual reports. This is a new substantial debate that or item that we have included in the mandate of the working group, which was adopted in SCP6. It should be noted that this discussion is not intended to analyze whether data disaggregation is an obligation or not of the treaty. Clearly, this is not an obligation of the treaty. Its inclusion is in response to the interest expressed by various participants on the importance of learning about the practices and challenges of the states on this topic. As a background, you will recall that at the February 2020 meeting of this working group, some participants pointed out that the aggregation of data in the reports makes comparability difficult. Others, however, indicated that comparability is not the objective of the treaty reporting obligations. The co-chairs, however, believe that a high level of data aggregation is not simply a matter of comparability, but also a matter of transparency, which requires meaningful reporting. On the other hand, the FAQ-type guidance document on the annual reporting obligation in questions 22 and 23 indicates that states parties should consider disaggregating information by category of conventional weapons, as well as by country of origin or destination. In addition, this discussion also acquires relevance in the context of the possible development of an online searchable database, which we will address later on in this meeting. To prepare the discussion, we have invited UNIDIR to provide a presentation on the practices, challenges, and limitations on data aggregation in annual reports. We would like to thank and acknowledge the contributions to this presentation made by Small Arms Survey and Stimson Center, which provided valuable information in line with our consistent research on this topic. Let me then introduce you to Mr. Himayu Shiotani, who is surely well known to many of you. He is the program head of the Conventional Arms Program at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, UNIDIR. Prior to his work with UNIDIR, he was a research associate at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies in Monterey, California. He holds a master's degree in international policy studies with a certificate in non-proliferation studies from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. Without further ado, you have the floor, Mr. Shiotani.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues. Please allow me to first begin by thanking Mexico and Romania, the co-chairs of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting, for inviting me to help set the scene on this topic today. I also wish to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to all state parties who are listening to this intervention. We very much look forward to a dialogue with you. I've been asked by the co-chairs today to try to help set the scene, or let's say provide a food for thought on the issue of aggregation of data, focusing on, let's say, practices and challenges and opportunities that state parties may be facing. I wish to thank the Mexican colleague, Alejandro, for already pointing out in his introduction that this is not a discussion necessarily about the obligation of the treaty to aggregate or disaggregate, but rather to exchange initial thoughts on the practices, challenges, and opportunities. I wish to just share the screen with you as I have prepared a presentation. And I also would like to deliver this presentation in English. So with this introduction, I'll get right into this. So as others have already pointed out, the point of departure of setting the scene is to recall Article 1 of the treaty, which is very clear in noting that transparency in itself is not the end goal, but it actually is looking at ways in which cooperation can be fostered in order to also support responsible actions by state parties in the international trade in conventional arms, thereby contributing to building confidence among state parties. I think recalling these key words of objectives are crucial in understanding why certain data and how they are presented and shared are crucial in this debate. I also want to recognize here that there is already good amount of guidance that exists among state parties in the ATT process on this topic. In summary, it all draws from the FAQ style guidance document that has been already issued. But in short, in summary, it really points towards key essential elements that facilitate this understanding. First is to indicate whether the transfer is actual or authorized. Second is to clearly indicate the number or the financial value of the what. What is the item that is being transferred? And thirdly, to clarify from whom to whom, essentially, as the basis of information that is useful not only to meet adequately the reporting obligations of the treaty, but going beyond that to build confidence, enabling information exchange to facilitate cooperation in the implementation of the treaty objectives more broadly. And here, the guidance document goes actually further. It actually recommends or encourages, let me say, state parties to consider these data by country of destination. And further, over time, it recognizes that consistency and continuity in the format in which reporting is done under annual reports to be, let's say, considered as a practice over time to maintain the consistency to make sense of the information that is being exchanged. Now, that is already captured in existing guidance under the state parties process. That said, of course, we realize that national practices vary quite considerably. And disaggregation or aggregation forms one part of the broader national practices variation. These variations may arise from information that is provided, whether it's actual or authorized transferred items, number or the value or both, the description of the transferred items. Some delegations earlier were rightly noting that national classifications or categorizations may vary also on the type of categories of items. And not all state parties also provide the comments on the transfer to describe the nature of those transfers. Within that variation, we see that there is a variation also on aggregation or disaggregation on the number of items that are transferred, grouping or disaggregating of exporting or importing states, destination-wise, but also specifically when it comes to the subcategories of small arms and light weapons, we see quite a variation in the practice with regards to aggregation and disaggregation. Now, of course, additionally to this, Others have already noted, and the co-chairs very clearly stated that additionally to the content, there is variations in the confidentiality of the nature of the reports, certain information being categorized as sensitive, certain information not being provided by the template, and the reporting template format varying as it's permitted by the state parties, the ATT state parties process. So all of this is to recognize that these variations also open up a wider discussion as to how does this information actually help state parties meet the objectives under Article 1 of the treaty. Now, I want to thank the Small Arms Survey Stimson Center and the ATT Monitor, from which I draw this information as well, which acknowledge that in recent years, there is an indication of an increased practice among state parties to aggregate data in their national reports. So where do we go from here in terms of challenges and opportunities? First, let's outline very clearly some of the commonly expressed national challenges that we have found in our consultation with state parties. These pertain first and foremost, but not the only, but first and foremost, pertaining to record keeping and information management systems at the national level. This is to acknowledge that states have various modalities of record keeping and information management, which may be centralized or decentralized in nature. And the variation of this may actually facilitate disaggregation or pose a hindrance to disaggregation efforts. It is also acknowledged that states have various capacities or resources dedicated to the disaggregation or aggregation of information management at the national level. We also heard from state parties in terms of practice that access to comprehensive data set, which allow for the disaggregation of the type, number, and the volume, and end user, or let's say the recipient destination of each transfer may not be permissible at the national level due to constraints in terms of record keeping. There's also challenges that we know that state parties have faced when preparing reports about verifying or validating some of this information domestically. And of course, you're very familiar. We just heard a little bit from our colleague from Greece about the challenges pertaining to multi-stakeholder coordination to gather this information adequately, also at the national level. So acknowledging these challenges, we want to pose some food for thought questions in terms of what could be useful for state parties to discuss further. And we have posed this in terms of opportunities. So there are a few thoughts here. In terms of good practice and lesson learned, it may be useful for state parties to exchange informally on the types of disaggregation of data that is collected and managed at the domestic level. What are those types? What are the most common types of disaggregated data domestically? Are there useful national procedures, databases, and tools that facilitate data disaggregation at the national level? What are some of the coordination experiences that have either enabled or hindered collection of disaggregated data at the domestic level? Are there challenges that come with sensitization or desensitization of this data when it comes to disaggregation? How are the disaggregated data actually used also domestically? That's also crucial in understanding what are the advantages to disaggregate and what are concrete incentives for state parties to disaggregate. These are also quite useful exchanges of lessons and practices. But there are additional components, perhaps, that can be useful for consideration. These include, what are some of the domestic practices that enable consistency in the type of data collected and to be reported? What are the types of assistance needs that may relate to disaggregation efforts at the national level? And most specifically, when we look at the data that has been disaggregated, we ask the question in the three areas. First, is there a particular challenge being posed, in particular on import data when it comes to disaggregation? What about the subcategories of small arms and light weapons? And are there information, let's say, exchange information management systems that adequately take into account information and records being maintained by the industry and other economic actors? These all pose, let's say, interesting questions for state parties to perhaps exchange informally on that will shed more insight perhaps into what is feasible, desirable when it comes to disaggregation of data. So in a summary, food for thought, drawing on the research done by some of our civil society experts, also building on what has already been done in state parties processes. We think that the takeaway points really are that reporting practices should include information that really helps inform the implementation and the realization of the treaty's objectives on transparency and confidence building objectives. Meaning, whether that's objectively meeting that domestically or wider, information that is shared should contribute to those objectives. And illustrative good practices drawing on existing guidance and practices already shared by state parties indicate that for each transfer, at minimum, information of the type, number, and the final exporting importing country should be included. And what's even better is to make use of the voluntary areas of what's already captured in the template in terms of the description of the item and the nature of the transfer. And that to acknowledge that these practices over time does matter in order to inform the utility in which these are serving the common objectives of the treaty under reporting and transparency. So with this very brief introduction, co-chairs, please allow me to express my sincere appreciation to you for your kind invitation and to the state parties for your attention. With this, thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Himayu, por
Thank you very much for this rich presentation with so many elements that allows us to better understand the item at hand and to better understand how to carry out a better data aggregation in annual reports. I'd like to know, to begin with, if there are any questions that you'd like to directly address to our key speaker. Secretariat, has anyone sent any question via the chat?
Mr. Coach, we are trying to verify there's a possibility of one request from the floor, but I'm just getting a confirmation of that. If you can give me a moment. Mr. Koche, we have a question that has been posed via the chat, but we think that this question can be directed or can be raised by the person who has asked it directly to the coaches. And that was a question coming from NRA. There's something they would want to say. I think you'll consider to give them a platform to say something.
Bien, adelante, NRA, si quiere
NRA, if you'd like to take the floor, you are welcome to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm sorry I don't have video capabilities right now. My question was, what is the definition Unidir is using for end user? I see it referenced often in these reports, and I just wanted to get some clarity on what the definition they're working on is. Thank you.
Tal vez, si no hay más preguntas por ahora para...
If there are no further questions addressed to our key speaker, we can hand over the floor back to Mr. Himayu so that he can reply to this question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair, for giving me the floor once again. And thank you very much to the NRA colleagues for this particular question. I think my answer will be fairly short in that as a research organization, we do not define what an end user is as UNIDIR. But as you are familiar and colleagues, each country may define what an end user is as part of a transfer that they actually undertake, which may or may not be defined in the end user documentation that will facilitate the transfer of each item. So in this regard, what is useful to recognize is that in the context of the Arms Trade Treaty and in the context of reporting, the FAQ style guidance notes that the information that is pertinent to this question is the final exporting or importing state. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor Shatani.
Thank you, Mr. Shatani. My question to the Secretariat, is there any other question in the chat addressed to Mr. Shatani?
Well, the last one received, Mr. Co-Chair, is from Mexico. Mexico has requested to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor, and I thank the panelists for the excellent presentation. I would like just to, I just submit the question in the chat, but in the case I will read it here for Mr. Shatani. Regarding your experience on the topics of transparency and exchange of information regarding conventional weapons, what is your view on the need to strike a balance between access to information legislations at the national level and the need to sometimes reserve some information for considerations of regarding national security purposes? I don't know if you can perhaps share your insights on this, Mr. Shatani, and I thank you in advance for your kind answer. Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair, if I may just pursue the response.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. I wish to also thank the delegation of Mexico for this very interesting question. And I must note that, of course, there are many others who are participating here who may also have very good knowledge in response to this question. But I will give an attempt to provide an answer. If I understood your question appropriately, I understand that domestically, state parties may have legal obligations to report on their transfers, whether it be to Parliament or other, let's say, bodies of oversight. And in this regard, those information, let's say, requirements are quite often defined very clearly in domestic legislation. And that is, let's say, the prerogative of the state to meet those domestic obligations. That said, when that information is to be exchanged wider, beyond their national obligations to the domestic, it is often the national prerogative to determine whether certain information is deemed to be sensitive for national security purposes. Now, this is fully understandable considering that certain states may find certain types of information to be deemed sensitive if shared externally. And certainly there's no obligation, as I understand it, that those information need to be shared under the ATT. And in fact, ATT permits information to be kept when sensitivities are arising. But I do understand the nature of your question, which is how do you strike the right balance? Here, what we have found in our research and dialogue with state parties is that domestic discussions on whether or not certain data sets need to be classified or not before reporting is undertaken is a useful practice. In other words, considerations should be undertaken at the domestic level when data is being consolidated to determine whether or not indeed the information that is deemed to be sensitive or to be classified is indeed something that is going to be considered sensitive to be shared externally. Because what we've learned from some state parties in this effort is that sometimes what is considered domestically sensitive may not necessarily be sensitive if shared bilaterally, for example, or amongst a group that is like-minded and they share a common economic area, for example. So, for example, in the case of EU. So these are just ideas that I can share with you, but I do understand the question that you're providing, and I hope that I was able to at least elaborate a little bit more to that question. Thank you very much.
You kindly did, Mr. Shiotani. Thank you very much.
Bien, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much. I see there are no requests for the floor. No one else wishes to ask questions to Mr. Shiotani. Can the Secretariat confirm this point, please, that there are no questions in the chat?
Mr. Co-Chair, I confirm that there is no request, any additional request for the floor. Thank you.
Muy bien, con esto quiero...
Very well. And to conclude, I would like to thank specifically Mr. Shiotani for having been available to share his presentation with us. We also know that he has some personal issues, and in spite of that, he agreed to be with us today and make his presentations. I wish you the best. I'm sure everything will be well with you, and we hope to be able to count on your support and your contributions in our working group on reporting and transparency on the issue of aggregation of data. Thank you very much for your participation. And now, Gracie, I understand, is in line. Would she like to take the floor? Gracie, would you like to make any additional comment on this issue?
Grecia parece que no se encuentra conectado.
Well, I guess it's not connected.
No, if I may, co-chair, just briefly, apologies for being interrupted with a connection earlier on. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of points, mainly that the ATT is a legally binding treaty with an interactive mechanism aimed at inter alia streamlining export control guidelines among member states. And for purposes of reporting clarity, given that we have a lot of different forums where reporting is a component for export control, for reporting clarity and from a national perspective, the information we submit to the ATT relates only to the military transactions, those being state transactions, exports and imports for the armed forces within a given calendar year. These are points of clarification that I wanted to raise finally in reiterating what I've indicated earlier, and I don't know how much of the presentation that I was able to give was heard by colleagues on the platform. So apologies once again for the bad connection, and I hope that my intervention was helpful in this capacity. I think there is momentum in terms of reaching some reporting clarity along the broader concept of the forums where we're called upon to report either voluntarily or legally. And as this chat and this forum has indicated, there's still some components, some aspects of the arms which we're called upon to register, that there's a lack of clarity, especially the small arms and light weapons. So again, thank you for this opportunity, co-chair, and the floor is back to you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Grecia, por esta muy útil.
Thank you, Stelios, for your comments. We are very thankful for your availability and for having connected with us in this meeting. I think other state parties would share my thought that it's been very interesting, your presentation about the public availability of initial and annual reports, as my co-chair said. I think Mauricio had a problem to connect to this session, but if he's available now, and if he would like to take the floor, we would be very happy to give him the floor. Well, it seems that he can't connect, so I'm just going to go on with the speaker list that we have for this point in the agenda. I give the floor to Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. You have the floor.
Thank you. WILP welcomes the discussion taking place on the issue of public availability of annual and initial reports under agenda item 3 of this meeting. Public availability of information goes hand in hand with the transparency objective set out by the treaty itself, and it's been disturbing to see the increase in the number of reports being kept private, and often without any specific reason indicated for doing so. We encourage states parties to make use of the time allocated for this agenda item today to explain the challenges, limitations, and/or preferences that lead them to make the reports private, as requested by the co-chairs in their introductory paper, and appreciated the inputs from Greece already. Regarding the question posed in paragraph 44 of the co-chair's introductory paper about aggregation and use of data found in annual reports, we wanted to share some of our experience in utilizing ATT report information, if it's helpful for states and those submitting reports to understand some of the ways in which that information is used on the other end. And I would add that use of this information is important in order to incentivize states parties to meet their reporting requirements and improve overall accountability. WILP staff and our members at national and regional levels have looked to ATT reports for preparing public presentations, for research and the publication of our own reports, and in national advocacy efforts. For example, we sometimes look to ATT reports when preparing submissions to human rights mechanisms as part of a country review like the UPR, and in at least one national context recently, civil societies wanted to use the ATT annual reports in order to cross-check and supplement nationally available arms transfer reports in the context of parliamentary oversight. Based on this experience, we've observed that the diversity in the quality and quantity of information included in the reports makes it challenging for comparisons and to analyze the data well. In addition, the annual reports would benefit from having more contextual information included, or if that is not possible, then initial reports should be more frequently updated as experience with treaty implementation deepens. To return to the example of gender-based violence risk assessments that I mentioned in my prior statement, this is an aspect of treaty implementation that has benefited from much information sharing and capacity building in recent years. We know that states parties have changed or refined their GBV risk assessment processes as a result since the time when many initial reports were submitted, yet it remains difficult to get a clear picture of how states parties assess the risk of GBV, which is often the #1 ATT-related issue upon which WILP is invited to comment. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por sus.
Thank you very much for your comments. And I give the floor to Nonviolence International Southeast Asia. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Nonviolence International Southeast Asia agrees that the disaggregation of data into more specific categories and classifications would indeed be beneficial in conducting comparative analyses and improving transparency. In order to do so, states must gather the necessary information during all stages of the weapons life cycle. Countries that have not done so are encouraged to update their templates, forms, or application requirements and their processes. Developing countries that have less capability to collect and centralize all this information might encounter some difficulty in developing such detailed reports. And so another area that would require assistance is in developing this capability in a centralized depository or in fostering communication and cooperation channels among government agencies. This would provide an excellent opportunity for states to update their documentation or to request assistance in this area if it is needed. And in the interest of time, I will speak very briefly about Agenda Item 4, if I may. Nonviolence International Southeast Asia reiterates the need for effective mechanisms, whether bilateral or multilateral, to facilitate information exchange. This need was echoed by participating states in the regional seminar we conducted on 26 September 2019 in Cambodia, entitled Siem Reap Interregional Meeting on Weapons and Ammunition Regulation. Thank you very much.
Gracias por compartir sus comentarios.
Thank you for sharing your comments and for your initiatives in your region. So I have a short list of speakers, and I'd like to ask the Secretariat whether there is in the chat any request for the floor.
Mr. Koche, from our end, there is no request for the floor arising from the chat room. So there's no additional request for the floor. Thank you.
Muy bien.
Very well. So, colleagues, we conclude point 3 of our agenda. It's been a very rich discussion with several themes, informed by presentations and very important interventions from the participants. We will take note. And I must say that they're going to be very useful for us co-presidents to assess the way forward to continue discussing these issues. And I do hope that you can be more active, sharing your opinions, your views about this issue that, as many speakers have mentioned, are very important when dealing with information exchange under the ATT. And now we're going to proceed to point 4 of our agenda, and I give the floor to my co-president, my co-chair.
Thank you, Alejandro. We will start with the first specific task under agenda item 4, namely structured mechanisms, processes, or formats facilitating the information exchanges. We would like to recall that this is also a recurring task that allows participants to propose and discuss any instrument that could strengthen, promote, or advance the information exchanges that the treaty requires or encourages states parties to undertake. The co-chairs remind ATT stakeholders that during the preparatory process of CSP6, the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting focused on 2 mechanisms, namely the information exchange platform in the restricted area of the ATT website and the diversion information exchange forum among states parties and signatory states, which will be addressed afterwards by Alejandro. Concerning the information exchange platform, the co-chairs consider that it has a great potential of strengthening the dialogue between states parties and signatory states in the intersessional period, and that states could have taken more advantage of the platform, especially during this challenging period when their opportunities for interaction have been quite limited. Given that the number of users that have requested access to the information exchange platform remains quite limited, the co-chairs strongly encourage states, parties, and signatory states to register online for access to the restricted area and to the IT platform. In the run-up to this meeting, the co-chairs posted announcements on the platform requesting contributions, proposals, and comments on several topics for this CSP7 cycle. Among the announcements that were posted on the platform, there was also one asking for proposals for other structured mechanisms, processes, or formats facilitating the information exchange. We would like to report that to date, the co-chairs have not received any specific proposals, neither via the information exchange platform nor via email. Therefore, we would like to give participants the opportunity to use this virtual meeting to advance oral proposals if they so wish. You will have the opportunity to do so after the presentation of the next topic. We also propose to leave open the possibility to submit proposals on this topic via email or the information exchange platform until the 9th of July of this year, with the intention that these proposals can be discussed in the CSP8 cycle. I will stop here and invite my co-chair to present the three-tier approach to sharing information on diversion. Alejandro, please, you have the floor.
Gracias.
Thank you. I will be brief. As you will recall, the working group on transparency and reports put a great effort for the adoption of the Diversion Information Exchange Forum last year at CSP6. That's fulfilling one of the pillars of the three-tier approach to diversion information exchange. The working group still has the mandate to monitor the implementation of such three-tier approach. As you know, the three tiers are policy-level exchanges on diversion in the WGETI Article 11 sub-working group. 2, intersessional exchange of relevant operational and policy-related information through the information exchange platform. And the third pillar, the informal meeting, general developments of the DIEF, for which we encourage participants to continue being active on this issue. Although there is no space on the agenda of this week's ATT meetings to address the DIEF, the Exchange Information Forum on Diversion, the co-chairs invited the chair of the DIEF, Mr. Tom Nij of Belgium, to share with participants of this working group a brief update on the arrangements for the first meeting of the forum. I just would like to mention that it's not our intention to have a discussion on this topic at this meeting. First, because the forum is convened or conceived as a separate body from the working group. And second, because of the limited time of this meeting. So, without further ado, I give the floor to Mr. Tom Nij, Belgium. You have the floor.
Thank you, Alejandro, for allowing me to address all our ATT stakeholders in your meeting. I'm very grateful for that. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the CSP7 president for entrusting to me the chairmanship of the Diversion Information Exchange Forum. I will try to be brief and just say a few words about the inaugural meeting of the forum as an actual subsidiary body of this conference, and about the way forward more generally. For the purpose of transparency about the forum, I do first want to bring to everyone's attention that since last week, the forum has its own webpage on the website of the Secretariat, where you can also find the terms of reference that govern the functioning of the forum. After these terms were discussed among states, parties, and signatories, and then adopted at CSP6, we indicated that the actual document would be made available to all stakeholders ahead of this first set of meetings in 2021, and so we did. Now, concerning the first meeting, as you know, at CSP6, states parties mandated the CSP7 president to organize that meeting within the timeframe and budget allocated for ATT meetings in 2021 and in line with the terms of reference. In principle, those terms provide that the forum can meet during the sessions of preparatory meetings and/or the conference itself. Unfortunately, the specific nature of the meeting and the ongoing pandemic have made setting a meeting difficult. Because of its confidential nature and the sensitivity of the information that is the essence of its work, we have considered it not feasible to conduct forum meetings in a virtual setting. That entails that we will only be able to have the inaugural meeting of the forum during the CSP7 cycle if CSP7 is organized as a physical meeting. And I'm well aware that that is a very big if. It would obviously be a disappointment if the inaugural meeting would have to be postponed to the CSP8 cycle, but our main concern is that the forum meetings will be meaningful and effective. And for that purpose, we believe that at least the inaugural meeting should be in person. If there will be no meeting possible at CSP7, this will of course collide with the decision of the conference at CSP6 to review the usefulness of the forum at CSP8. The idea there was that we would have an evaluation after 2 cycles of meetings. And in that respect, it is my proposal as chair that if there is no forum meeting at CSP7, the conference will decide to defer the evaluation of the forum to CSP9, so that the evaluation can still cover 2 cycles of forum meetings. If desired, I will then happily cover the extended evaluation period. I do want to emphasize that the absence of the inaugural meeting does not mean that no information exchange under the auspices of the forum can take place. As explicitly included in Rule 13 of the Terms of Reference, states are in any case encouraged to share relevant information via the information exchange platform in the restricted area of the ATT website, whenever this is feasible, also taking into account legal considerations. This is important more generally, as it is intended to extend the reach of relevant information beyond those officials participating in forum meetings and thereby maximize its potential impact. The same applies to the encouragement in Rule 20 to exchange up-to-date contact details of relevant enforcement authorities to allow for the efficient and effective exchange of operational diversion-related information in the field. The latter should be done through the Secretariat. States, parties, and signatories can consider this a call to arms, not just to share relevant information via the platform now, but also to start considering cases they should share once we will be able to meet in person. I really want to call on states to mainstream sharing relevant information with other states, parties, and signatories through the forum every time they suspect or detect diversion. Except when there are legal objections in play, with the forum in place, including its confidential nature and strict terms of reference, there are no compelling reasons left why states would not do so by default. In that respect, it should be very clear that the forum is not about pointing fingers, but about helping each other to prevent diversion. And that is, of course, among the primary objects of our treaty. Lastly, I want to address the role of civil society organizations. The forum is a confidential body, and there are stringent reasons for that. We do know, however, that there are civil society organizations that are working with states in investigating, identifying, and/or addressing cases of diversion. And I hope that those organizations will encourage those states to share relevant information in the forum, or even assist those states in presenting cases in a manner that is feasible. I also reiterate that it's not the intention to conduct policy discussions in the forum. That will still happen in the subgroup on Article 11. Co-chairs, as chair of the Diversion Information Exchange Forum, I will continue to conduct awareness raising and outreach about the forum during the intersessional period towards CSP7, and I will emphasize the work that can still happen. Any communication about the organization of CSP7 and a potential forum meeting there will obviously be done by the president. Thank you, co-chairs.
Muchas gracias al presidente del foro.
Thank you very much, Chair, for this presentation on exchange of information relating to diversion. Your update since we organized the first meeting has been very useful to listen to. Although I am aware that some of the difficulties may not be settled in the following days or weeks, it's very useful to better understand your position in case those difficulties are aggravated. It's also useful to indicate that information can be exchanged through different instruments, and it's absolutely necessary to recommend countries to continue with that practice. I'd now like to move on to the speakers list on item 4 of the agenda. Belgium will have the floor to begin with. Belgium.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. On the topic of the information exchange platform, we want to renew the idea that Belgium raised in its statement to CSP6 about complementing the existing platform in the restricted area of the ATT website with the public part to allow additional exchanges among all ATT stakeholders. The use of the restricted platform we still need to kick off, for example, with the Diversion Information Exchange Forum, but for the purpose of our general discussions in the working group, especially in the intersessional remote consultation, it might benefit from a public part. Having said that, we are obviously aware that we need to take into account our IT priorities and the dedicated budget. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Bélgica. Muy interesante su propuesta.
Thank you very much, Belgium. I find your suggestion very interesting, as I'm sure others are also interested in what you just recommended. Non-Violence Institute for Southeast Asia has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. In the interest of time, we incorporated our statement on this agenda item in our earlier statement, and so we have nothing more to add at this time. Thank you very much.
Muy bien.
Duly noted.
Tema de la agenda, pero quiero preguntar al...
The list of speakers was very short, so before finishing this item, I'd like to ask the Secretariat whether anyone has asked any further questions via the chat.
Mr. Co-Chair, we have received a request via the chat room or function. A request from Australia for the floor. Australia, please.
Australia, adelante, por favor.
You have the floor, Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. And as this is the first time I've taken the floor, I'd like to extend my thanks to the President, the Secretariat and the team for putting on a great meeting this week. Australia is a big supporter of information exchange, both in informal and formal settings. As folk would know, we, together with New Zealand, were hoping to host a Pacific workshop last year, but due to the pandemic, we had to postpone this to a later date. I just wanted to make mention of another avenue that we've been exploring in recent years, and that is training courses in the context of capacity building. One particular course I wanted to mention that we were able to support this year, as in previous years, together, I think, with the Government of Canada, is the Geneva Centre for Security Policy, building capacities for effective implementation of the ATT. Australia was very pleased to support this course. We had over 80 participants taking part from around the world through virtual means. And I think it's a really good example of really a mechanism, a structured mechanism or format that really facilitates information exchange in the context of the Arms Trade Treaty. As this is the last time I'll take the floor on this agenda item, I just wanted to say that we're very supportive of the co-chair's work on the transparency and reporting and the templates as well. And we wish you all success. Thanks.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Australia. And thank you as well for sharing this initiative. We encourage you to continue supporting workshops of the kind to improve capacities. Secretariat, does anyone else want to take the floor at this point in time?
I don't have any further requests for the floor. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Very well, thank you.
Continuaríamos con el siguiente punto de la agenda.
I'd like to continue now with the following item on the agenda. Reporting and transparency functionalities of the IT platform. The first sub-item under item 5 relates to the problems or inconveniences experienced with the IT platform. I'll be very brief in my presentation of this matter, as this is also a recurring task on this working group's agenda, in which participants have the opportunity to highlight any problems or inconveniences detected in the use of the information exchange platform or on the online reporting tool, which are both located in the restricted area of the ATT website. As we have already mentioned in this meeting, on 13 April, the co-chairs published 6 announcements in the aforementioned information platform. In addition to their circulation via email, the Secretariat also kindly distributed these announcements to the different state members of the ATT. The process to publish these announcements was very simple, and we have not identified any inconveniency in relation to the platform. Nonetheless, we are very interested in knowing your experience with the said platform. I will now hand the floor over to my co-chair so that she can introduce the next and the final agenda item in our program. You have the floor, Julia.
Thank you, Alejandro. The last task on our agenda for today is the searchable online database. The co-chairs recall that the idea of developing a searchable database is not new. It has come across in previous discussions in this working group. And in this regard, we would like to point out to the overwhelming consensus among participants at the March 2018 meeting of the working group, that the information generated through the annual report should be available in a searchable database. We are glad that we got to the point where the working group actually starts discussing about such a project. We should be aware that any progress in the development of a searchable database also requires decisions on other issues that are currently being discussed in the working group, such as the reporting templates and on more general issues such as the budget. In this context, the co-chairs consider that a long-term approach is needed to ensure that careful consideration is given to states parties' expectations and needs with respect to a searchable online database, and to assess the cost benefits of investing in such an instrument. It is important that states parties firstly discuss and decide on the parameters and features of such a database, and only afterwards a cost-benefit analysis could be possible. In that respect, the co-chairs have requested the ATT Secretariat to prepare a background paper outlining questions that could be put to states parties to ascertain what they want and expect from a searchable online database, and present it during this meeting. Therefore, we would like to hand the floor to the Secretariat for their presentation, not before thanking them for the hard effort they put into drafting the paper. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you for inviting the Secretariat to make this presentation of the background paper that we submitted to the working group. So the introduction of the paper, or the background paper, will be done by Sarah Parker, who is a senior policy officer at the Secretariat. So she would start with the presentation immediately. Mr. Parker, please.
Thank you, Dumasani. Good afternoon, everyone. And once again, I would like to thank the co-chairs for the opportunity to introduce the background paper that the Secretariat prepared at the request of the co-chairs regarding considerations for a searchable online database. The paper is included as Annex C to the co-chairs' introductory paper for this session and is available online. Now, many of you will know that the idea of developing the searchable database that would allow the extraction and analysis of data contained in ATT annual reports has been referenced under this agenda item for some time now. And as the co-chair just mentioned, the co-chairs were interested to take this idea forward and explore possibilities and, of course, the cost implications for states parties to the treaty of developing such a tool. But it became apparent that before the Secretariat can obtain a cost estimate for this kind of tool, it is necessary to define the parameters or desired features of such a tool. And for this, there needs to be a concrete discussion among stakeholders to determine what they want and what they expect from such a feature, what is desirable and what is needed. Once we have those parameters, we can then find out how much it will cost and whether it is something that states parties agree that they want to invest in. So the aim of the paper is to ask questions that will help determine what states and stakeholders want from a possible searchable online database, so that there is a shared vision of what such a tool will deliver, and so that no one is surprised or disappointed with the outcome. So the questions we put to stakeholders, I seem to have lost my device. Can someone just press the slide? Too much multitasking for one day. The questions put to stakeholders in the paper are essentially the following. First of all, why do participants want a searchable online database? What would participants use an online database for? So what queries would you like the database to answer? What information or analysis do you want the searchable database to produce? Do you want it to just export raw data or to generate graphs and charts? Next slide, please. Thank you. Do you want the database to be able to perform automatic calculations? So you could ask a question, what is the total value of weapons exported by state X between 2017 and 2021, for example? What would you do with the information generated by the database, and how would it help you in your daily work? Would the information generated by the database help states parties implement any of their obligations under the treaty? So, for example, would it help you conduct risk assessments under Article 7 or Article 11? Who would use such a searchable online database? States parties, signatories, civil society, industry, international and regional organizations? What would an ATT searchable online database add to the existing landscape? As I'm sure many of you are aware, there are publicly available searchable online databases that allow users to conduct queries regarding arms transfers. These include the CIPRI Arms Transfers Database, UN Comtrade, and the COARM EU Online Database. So what is the added value of an ATT searchable database? And are there gaps in the existing databases on arms transfers that an ATT searchable database would or could fill? And would the value of the ATT searchable database be limited compared to other databases, given that it would only analyze information from ATT annual reports and no other sources of information? And finally, are there methods of reporting that might limit the efficacy or utility of an ATT searchable database? For instance, the format of reports. There are some 285 annual reports that have been submitted in total. I think it's now 287 actually. 19 of those were submitted using the online reporting tool. So arguably the data in those reports can be easily extracted because it is already electronically available. Thank you. But the remaining reports are in Word or PDF, and the data from those reports would need to be manually entered into the electronic database, as would any future reports that are submitted in Word or in PDF. And what about the fact that states parties can report authorized or actual exports and imports of arms? Does this affect the ability to compare and add figures? Likewise, the annual reporting template gives states parties the option to report on the number of items transferred or the value of items transferred, or both. Does this have implications for the compatibility of data? And what should be done with the data that is contained in annual reports that are not made public? If this is excluded from the searchable database, what are the implications for the information that is generated? I will leave the questions up on the board for the discussion that follows. And with that, I thank the co-chairs once again, and I look forward to your discussions on this point. Thank you.
The co-chairs also thank the Secretariat for their presentation, and we would like to open the floor to delegations for delegations to share their views on the paper and on the proposed approach. The co-chairs took note of the remarks on the topic which were expressed during yesterday's session by some delegations. After also hearing the views expressed today, the co-chairs will take very good consideration of all the comments and remarks transmitted, and will provide a proposal on how to follow up with this task in the period ahead to the CSP7. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the delegations that have registered to speak under this agenda item. Other delegations wishing to share their views are invited to signal this intention via the chat function. On the speakers list, there are only 2 delegations, Mexico and Canada. So we shall start with Mexico. Mexico, please, you have the floor.
Gracias, copresidenta, por concederme nuevamente el uso de la palabra.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor once again. I'll be very, very short, very brief. We'd like to thank the Secretariat for preparing this document with a set of questions that can help states reflect on what they would like to see included in this searchable database. From the questions you make, there are several elements which are important to bear in mind, such as the format of the reports, the difference between the data of the authorized and actual real exports carried out, the difference in the value, and the difference between public and non-public reports. States need to decide what they want this database to serve for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico, for your remarks. And I would like now to call on Canada to share their views.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Since our intervention touches upon several of the agenda points, as well as this one, would you prefer I deliver it under the any other business agenda item, or would you like me to proceed now?
You can proceed now, please. Please
Okay.
go ahead.
I will deliver my statement in French. Merci beaucoup, Madame Facilitatrice.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I'd like to thank also the Secretariat for the organization of this week's meetings.
Le Canada voudrait tout d'abord affirmer son soutien au co-président du groupe de travail, de transparence et l'établissement de rapports et aux travaux réalisés par ce groupe de travail. Notre intervention abordera en un seul énoncé un certain nombre de sujets liés à la transparence et à l'établissement de rapports. Ce qui concerne le point numéro 1 de l'ordre du jour, bilan de respect des obligations en matière de présentation de rapports, le Canada a le plaisir d'informer tous les États partis que nous avons soumis notre rapport initial en septembre 2020, conformément à l'article 13. Nous préparons actuellement notre premier rapport annuel qui sera soumis avant la date limite de
31st of May.
Le Canada considère la transparence et le partage des informations comme des avantages clés du traité sur la gouvernance. Ainsi, nous estimons que tous les États partis doivent s'acquitter de leurs obligations découlant du traité en ce qui concerne l'établissement de rapports. Nous sommes préoccupés par la tendance à la baisse qui se poursuit dans l'établissement des rapports annuels obligatoires. Nous espérons que tous les États partis respecteront leur engagement de présenter l'ensemble des rapports.
Excuse me, may I stop you here a little bit? It seems that the translation has not muted the speaker, and it is very difficult for us to understand both of the translator and the speaker. Is this fixed? Can we go on? Okay.
So let's continue. Let's continue.
We can continue. Please, Canada, go ahead.
D'accord.
And excuse me for this interruption.
Ainsi, nous estimons que tous les États partis doivent s'acquitter de leurs obligations découlant du traité en ce qui concerne l'établissement de rapports.
With respect to reporting.
Nous sommes préoccupés par la tendance à la baisse qui se poursuit dans l'établissement de rapports annuels obligatoires et nous espérons que tous les États partis respecteront leur engagement de présenter.
Excuse me, it seems that the problem persists. May I ask the speaker to make some pauses between the speaking lines so that the translator would have enough time to translate that? Okay, it seems that the problem has been fixed. So again, apologize for the interruption, but please proceed with your statement.
Furthermore, we encourage states parties to make public their reports presented to the ATT. As regards item 4 of the agenda, an organizational means for the exchange of information, Canada is very happy with the creation of this forum for the exchange of information on diversion, and we hope that this forum will be able to meet in person at CSP7. We're grateful to the President for having taken the necessary measures. Canada believes that ATT can be a space for sharing between states parties and signatory states to exchange information relating to diversion in support of the treaty's objectives. We recognize that the forum initially will be a project that will have to be developed, and states parties and signatory states will have to begin to feel comfortable relating to the use of this forum, and the question of balance between the various contributions and contribution of civil society to the forum is something that have to be studied. Canada has full confidence in the presidency to find the right balance. Finally, as regards item 5 of the agenda, functionalities relating to the IT platform, Canada fully supports the efforts that have been made as regards the searchable database online. This is something that is very useful to obtain information on the ATT. Such a searchable online database makes it possible to have access to useful information for the states parties and other parties, and it would make it possible for them to be able to use these data more usefully, and we fully support the development of such tools at a reasonable cost. We also would like to indicate that Canada will submit in writing comments to the co-presidents and the Secretariat on this issue. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
I thank you for this intervention, and I am glad that the technical problems have been fixed and we could hear. I confirm that we could hear Canada's statement. Do we have any other delegations wishing to take the floor at this point? Okay, thank you very much for letting me know that. Then I guess that with this final intervention, we have got to the end of our agenda. We would like to thank all the delegations that have contributed not only to the discussion on this topic, but also to all the deliberations of this meeting of the working group on transparency and reporting. We have had a very lively and engaging dialogue throughout this meeting. The co-chairs will make sure to reflect the discussions in the summary report of the meeting, in which they will also indicate further steps on the topics, including some that will be addressed in remote consultations in order to ensure a successful outcome at CSP7. Please note that in the remote consultations, the co-chairs will also provide a draft of the working group mandate in the period between CSP7 and CSP8 for the delegation's consideration. We still have one issue to address before adjourning the meeting. I believe that Control Arms has expressed their intention to deliver a general statement under any other business. If Control Arms is ready to speak, I invite them to take the floor.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear. Please proceed.
Thank you. Control Arms welcomes the constructive engagement by all ATT stakeholders in the sub-working group on transparency and reporting. We also welcome the informative presentation of the newly formed Diversion, Information and Exchange Forum, or DIEF, and the recent publication of the terms of reference for this forum, now available on the ATT Secretariat website. As we have noted on several occasions over the past 15 months, Control Arms is concerned about the growing interest in closed processes that exclude the voices of key ATT stakeholders. As a result of decisions taken by silence procedure during CSP6 and without disclosure of key organizational documents such as the DIEF terms of reference, states parties established two channels of closed communications. One is a restricted area of the ATT Secretariat website for information exchange between states parties, and the other is the formal establishment of the DIEF, where participation is limited to ATT states parties and signatories. As is now clear from the DIEF terms of reference, according to Rule 8, there is a very narrow exception to this rule. Certain non-state representatives may be invited to participate in the DIEF, but only in very limited circumstances. First, signatories and states parties must submit a written proposal to invite a non-state expert to participate in the DIEF only for the purposes of presenting a concrete diversion case and taking part in the ensuing debate. Then the proposed non-state expert must be approved by all state parties without objection after a 5-day silence procedure. Furthermore, to even qualify for consideration as a non-state expert, the selected non-state participant must have expertise in investigating, establishing, identifying, and/or addressing cases of diversion. This requirement alone could effectively exclude all but a handful of civil society organizations which have made and continue to make critical contributions to the advancement of this treaty in all areas, including to prevent and detect diversion. Observer states, UN agencies, international organizations, civil society, and industry play a critical role in the treaty's universalization and implementation and in holding states parties accountable to their commitments. Civil society organizations from all backgrounds provide substantive input into ATT working groups, contribute to national and regional capacity building worldwide, and develop independent research and analysis to support states in their efforts to join and implement the treaty. Without the ability to provide independent input into the discussion and debate inside the DIEF and in other important contexts, civil society's role and contribution, which have been welcomed by so many delegations this week, will be diminished. Now that we have more visibility into the operation of the DIEF by the means of the TOR, we look forward to the opportunity to discuss with states parties the contents of the DIEF terms of reference with more clarity in anticipation of their planned review during the CSP7 cycle. Of additional concern, the restriction on civil society engagement set out in Rule 8 of the DIEF terms of reference is also incorporated into the proposed revision of the CSP6 President's Paper, which was presented earlier this week by Ambassador Villegas of Argentina for endorsement by CSP7. The apparent attempt to extend these restrictions on the involvement of civil society and other stakeholders beyond the DIEF and into other efforts to detect cases of diversion under the Arms Trade Treaty runs contrary to the established ATT CSP rules of procedure, and it undermines a key purpose of the ATT, which is to promote transparency. Control Arms urges states parties to revisit paragraph 7 of the section Possible Recommendations for Approval in the draft CSP6 President's Paper, revised version 2, and to take measures to safeguard the participation of civil society in the ATT process. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Control Arms, for your statement. We took note of the points you have raised. I think we are now ready to close the meeting. From our part, before handing over to the Secretariat for some final announcements, we just want to thank once again to all the participants that have joined us for this meeting, and to say that we look forward to collaborating further with all the ATT stakeholders in advancing the work of this working group and in preparing the decisions that will be assessed by the Sovereign Conference of States Parties. So I hand the floor to the Secretariat.